Deine nicht diese Töne, sondern lasst uns angenehmere anstimmen und töne, sondern lasst uns angenehmere anstimmen und Folge
Right on. Welcome, X. Welcome, world. Very excited for everyone to be here tonight. Tonight, we are going to be doing a deep dive into the Jeffrey Epstein network with two of the premier journalists that actually were on the ground covering the story as it broke and helping break the story for years and years and years now. So I'm joined by Nick Bryant here, and Ryan Dawson will be with us shortly. He had some family things to attend to, and he'll be jumping in shortly. But Nick, why don't you give the audience that might not be familiar with your work just a little introduction to how you got involved with the Epstein story and where your expertise jumps into this?
I've been actually very serious about children's issues for quite some time. I wrote a book in 1995 called America's Children Trying for Tragedy, which had nothing to do with trafficking, but I showed how lower socioeconomic children in the United States are really getting short shrift. And I wrote about a number of children's issues. And then in 2002, I was talking to an editor in New York, and he asked me to pitch him some stories, and I pitched him some. He wanted me to pitch him some dark stories, and I ended up pitching him some very dark stories. And ultimately, pursuing one of those stories led me to Omaha, Nebraska in 2003, where I knew that something had gone down there. There was, according to the internet, it was a nationwide child trafficking network that was hooked up to intelligence and blackmail and flying kids around the country. I initially didn't see evidence of that in New York, but once I got to Omaha, Nebraska, I realized that it was all true and that Boys Town, the historic, iconic orphanage on the outskirts of Omaha, was being plundered for kids. That it was a smorgasbord for pedophiles, and I was really stunned. And I spent about 7 or 8 days there. And then when I got back to New York City, I was still stunned that this went on, that there was this huge child trafficking network and it was covered up by state and federal authorities. I just found it mind boggling. And I decided that it was something I was going to dedicate my life to writing a book about it. And the book that ultimately got published was The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. And it took me I researched it for about 7 years, and I was able to prove it I scored sealed grand jury exhibits and sealed grand jury testimony. And I was able to prove it. And then I found a lot of people in Washington, D.C., because kids were being flown to Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., there was a party house that was wired for audiovisual blackmail, much like Epstein's homes. And it was owned by a guy named Craig Spence. And the Franklin scandal and the Epstein scandal are kind of carbon copies in a number of ways. So that book was published in 2009, 2010. And I'd been reading about Epstein. And at that point, Epstein was a lone pedophile. But something wasn't quite right with me. There was a grand jury that didn't indict Epstein on a single count of child trafficking. I didn't know how corrupt that grand jury was, but it just seemed like there was something off. So in 2012, I made a sojourn to Florida. And at that point, I was able to acquire Epstein's Black Book. And then I started calling victims from the Black Book. And they started telling me about being flown around on planes. And then at that point, I realized Epstein was running a nationwide pedophile network, much like the Franklin scandal. And that's how I got into it.
So you've really been on the story from the start. And that's why I'm so excited tonight is because although I'm so new to the game and I try my best to learn, there's no one better to learn from than the journalists that have actually been on the story from the beginning and actually uncovering evidence, following leads, talking to victims, and really digging the story open. And so we're joined by Ryan Dawson, another journalist that has been on this story from the very beginning and covering stories much like this since even before. Ryan, why don't you give everyone a brief summary of how you got involved in the Epstein case and sort of where your journalism on this all began?
Am I? I don't see myself on the screen, but oh, thanks, Ian. And okay. I'm having trouble seeing anyway. I don't know if y'all heard.
Yeah. Yeah, our hearts are going out to you, bro.
I kind of touched on Epstein off and on because I talked to a victim back in 2007, but there wasn't much I could do about it. By then I'd already been banned off everything. I got blanket banned in 2005. So I had a forum. It was called Rise 2 Cents, and we used to talk about it on there. But it was hard to verify a lot of this. I call her a woman, but I mean kid. It's claims. And when he got arrested the first time, then there was more data and things to share. And it was like, as expected, he got a sweetheart deal from Barry Kersher, was the main protagonist in that. And all these people got immunity, including some of his top henchmen. And he basically only got weekend jail. And that, the story just sort of faded. We tried to keep it alive. We kept getting more information and digging in and listening to victims. I'd already been tracking Jean-Luc Burnell for a long time because he got popped and was on 60 Minutes, and he was doing the same sort of thing, mostly in Paris. He was running Karen models, which became MC2. Used to rent from Mark Epstein. He used to knock girls out and rape them in the limo and stuff with a couple of perverts there in France. And so I was more on that wing until Epstein got rearrested. And it was just by coincidence I'd written a big Epstein piece in May of 2019, trying to say, guys, don't. And I was linking it to Deborah Jean Palfrey, which is another DC prostitution ring. There's another one now with the Lee brothel ring, like today, same area. They have one in Cambridge as well. And I guess once Epstein got rearrested is when the public interest, because there really wasn't a lot back in 2008, 2007. I don't know what it was about 2019, but everybody was ready to listen all of a sudden. I guess because the media made it a thing because they were trying to connect him to Trump. And so because of that whole Trump Acosta angle, it actually got air, whereas before it really didn't. And so then people were really, really ready to listen. And of course, I got banned again. And so I got so pissed off, I made this, like what I'm wearing, mapped it
Yeah.
out, put the client list on the back. I don't understand why people are waiting for the federal government to release a list when you have the list. You can listen to the victims, you can listen to his employees. They know who raped them. They'll tell you, and it's all in the court documents and things. It's not all in one spot like a nice little list, but you can go and grab them. And but people are like waiting for the government to tell on itself, which just isn't going to happen. And if you want to rewind, like prior to Epstein, because Epstein he did not create this pedophile ring. He walked into a pre-existing network that goes all the way back at least to the Sunborn Institute, which is highly responsible for smuggling in illegal arms into Israel, including eventually highly enriched uranium to Israel. And they always had a compromise wing from that institute. It's a ring of millionaires at the time, now billionaires. Some of these people overlap with the infamous WhatsApp group that was pressuring to get college students arrested for opposing genocide. Of course, they frame it as Hamas terrorist sympathizers. And Trump is going along with that right now. But that was the ring. And these people, it's not just because people over focus on Epstein's crimes with the kitty fiddling and not so much on all his white collar crimes too, with Bear Stearns and Tower Financial. And so there was a lot of white collar crime and money laundering that goes in league with the compromise. Because like, what is a compromise for? They're not just like film. Is my language? Am I allowed to say whatever I want, or do I have to police myself? Or
Yeah,
oh
there's
yeah.
no
So
way to
why are they
talk about
fucking these
Epstein
little
without
kids?
without
Yeah,
getting into
that gives me freedom.
Yeah.
Good.
And
Good.
Ryan, before we get too deep into what's going on modern, I think I want to rewind us a little bit, because when I went on Joe Rogan and tried to just breach the basics of this stuff to a wider audience of people that aren't informed about it, we saw the internet kind of break with a bunch of people trying to claim as though we didn't have proof, as though we don't have the evidence, as though we don't really know what Epstein was up to. And a lot of people, even I think, are still in disbelief that trafficking networks and blackmail networks even exist, because it's just too hard for a regular suburban person to wrap their head around without having a little bit of historical context to realize that this is not a unique or new thing. This has been going on in America for 100 years and more. So I was hoping that you guys could walk us backwards to like, where did this certain brand, because blackmail obviously has been around for forever. Blackmail is just the idea that I can control someone if I know something about them that they don't want to get out. So that's been going on since Rome and long before. But video sexual blackmail obviously had to evolve with video technology. And I have some idea of where I think it started, but Nick and Ryan, let's start with Nick. I'd be curious for your guys' take on, where do you see this sort of modern video sexual blackmail? Just briefly, where do you see that starting in America or around the world?
Well, it's difficult to know. I mean, as you were saying, sexual political blackmail has been around forever. There's been these hagiographies written about our founding fathers, and Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old who was married, and her husband was shaking down Alexander Hamilton. And then a muckraking journalist heard about the story and he published it. And Hamilton and Jefferson had a lot of antipathy towards each other. And the muckraking journalist thought that Jefferson would give him an appointment in his cabinet because he'd outed Hamilton. And Jefferson didn't. So he outed Jefferson on having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. And actually, DNA has proven that.
Interesting.
So
No, that was Randolph Jefferson.
It goes all the way back to the founding fathers, sexual political blackmail, since the inception of the country.
Interesting. And I can't help but notice that Alexander Hamilton had to do with the founding of the banks too. He was big in the banking world.
Indeed, he was.
Yeah.
Central banks.
So Ryan, where do you see video blackmail popping up for the first time in America?
One of the oldest video blackmailers was Mickey Cohen, and that overlap with the Bobby Baker scandal, who was the Epstein of old. But Mickey Cohen used to secretly videotape celebrities and try to blackmail, because back then Hollywood was just getting going. It was
And
run
Mickey
by
Cohen was a
organized crime.
mobster, correct?
Yeah, I should say that. Mickey Cohen was in organized crime, the Jewish mafia. He used to do that, and so did the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and the early CIA. They had a thing called Midnight Madness or Operation Midnight, where they would secretly film people having sex on LSD. Who knows why? What that experiment was about. But Doug Valentine's written about that with the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, where they had set up Vegas hotel rooms with one-way mirrors, and they didn't have like the tiny little cameras we have today, but they had ways to do it. And they would tape people having sex and compromise them, and that led into politicians, businessmen, etc. And Vegas had legalized prostitution, so right away they were doing this in the United States. So Cohen and Baker and the federal government were doing this as soon as it was possible to do it. As soon as
Is
you
that
had
before
video
J. Edgar
recorders.
Hoover was found out to be a transvestite, or was that around the same time as the
Well, he was a
mob was realizing?
cross-dresser. I don't know if that's the same or what. That stuff confuses me. He had a lover, Clyde Tolson, and they had the goods on him. Frank Costello had that, and then Meyer Lansky and Jake Lansky got it. And so Hoover was blackmailing people, not just sexual blackmail, any kind of blackmail he could get with his G-men.
Yeah.
And then when you blackmail the blackmailer, you now have whatever they have. And the New York Mafia had Hoover by the shorties. He denied the mob existed.
It's
the director
important
of
to
the
give
FBI.
context to people that Hoover founded the FBI, and he also was the head of the Bureau of Investigation before the FBI was founded, and he was in charge of that institution for 48 years. And so through all of the seminal years of organized crime growing in America, like as prohibition was kind of ending and the rum runners had turned into organized crime that we know today, the bureau that was supposed to be going after organized crime was blackmailed by organized crime. And so, if I'm not mistaken, in that era, Hoover and some of these high level organized crime figures started working together to collect blackmail because they were already blackmailing each other anyways, right? So they sort of formed an alliance.
One of
That's
the
right.
sub-projects of MK Ultra was, Ryan alluded to it, Operation Midnight Climax.
Yeah.
And there was safe houses in New York and safe houses in San Francisco. And it was run by a very disturbed individual named George White,
Yeah.
who was CIA. And that's where I think a lot of these techniques were really developed. And prostitutes would bring the Johns back to these blackmail houses, and they would be slipped to Mickey's or whatever. But then, as Ryan had mentioned, Doug White said that this blackmail ultimately went into like diplomats and politicians, that George White didn't stop there. And George White was a severely deranged individual.
George White was the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, or he was the head of Psych War Department for a little while, of MK Ultra's wing anyway. And he worked out of Ted Shackley's little secret unit there in Florida. Personal friend of both Santos Trafficante, the mob boss of Tampa, and also Jack Ruby. And Jack Ruby ran the Carousel Club and several other gentlemen's clubs, let's just say, from New Orleans to Dallas. And they would use some of those girls as forced prostitutes. And this all overlaps. But yeah, why is George White, the head of MK Ultra, the founder of it, who worked in the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, buddies with these mafia figures, the guy that ended up shooting Oswald, and then of course Santos Trafficante, whose list is too long to name. And they're all friends, and they knew Cohen and the rest of them. Cohen's who blackmailed Marilyn Monroe. And yeah, like Operation Midnight Climax even spread into Canada. And so, and it's the same thing as Madness. It's just like there's MK Ultra, there's MK Naomi, which is MK Ultra on children, all the way on up to today. They finally knocked that off. They never really gave the results of Midnight Madness or what the point of that was. I think it's just because they're a bunch of perverts.
Yeah, no, they destroyed all the files as quickly as they possibly could the moment they realized that the Church and Pike committees were getting serious, right? Because some of these covert operations that were theoretically sanctioned by the government, although they were black ops cordoned off from any type of oversight, they were never supposed to be doing the kind of stuff they did. And they knew that if that stuff was made public in these public hearings back in the 80s, that they were going to have to pay the price. And so Richard Helms and his buddies destroyed all the files, right?
Actually, in 1972, Nixon ordered mind control programs to cease and desist.
Interesting.
But they kept going on. There's a tremendous amount of evidence
Yeah.
that the mind control programs are still going on to this day. There was a great study done by some international researchers. It's called the Extreme Abuse Survey. And there were 400 individuals that were queried about different aspects of their abuse. And a number of them, and we're talking a number of them, said that they had been part of government mind control. And the categories, I would suggest that people Google the Extreme Abuse Survey, and they will see that if there's 1,400 respondents, and they say some very, very nefarious things that were done to them, but they all can't be lying. They all can't be delusional.
You bring up a really important point, Nick, that there is just an immense amount of testimony, even on YouTube and on X and online, of modern survivors of sexual abuse and blackmail scandals and trafficking that are all telling various stories that are obviously all unique and maybe not all true, but it's really hard to conceive of every single one of them lying, especially when it's a lie that in the sense that you're basically lying, you're self-defaming. You're saying that your life has been messed up in this horrible way and you're a broken person and you've gone through all these horrible things. Like, it's not like these people are making money off of these things. They're not gaining from making these allegations. In many cases, they're putting their lives at risk. And so I think that a lot of normal people don't understand just how much testimony there is, both about Epstein and about larger trafficking networks in general, right? And so it sounds to me like we've talked a little bit about the founding of sort of the mob and government relationship, mostly intelligence agencies. And it sounds like you guys are describing that it evolved over time from the early days when cameras were rudimentary and cameras obviously got more and more advanced, drugs got introduced and drug use got more and more studied and more advanced through programs like MK Ultra. And we're approaching the 1980s when Jeffrey Epstein entered the scene. Nick, do you get the sense that the Franklin scandal was adjacent to Epstein? It was kind of before his time, right?
Yeah, the Franklin scandal was around for 10 to 12 years, and it was ultimately shut down around 1989. So it does overlap with Epstein.
Yeah.
But over the course of my research, I've found that there are a number of protected networks.
Yeah.
Franklin and Epstein, they aren't two off. They're just one of many protected networks. And I think Epstein probably got going in the mid 80s. Les Wexner gave Epstein power of attorney over his vast empire. He was the CEO of L Brands, which owned Victoria's Secret and Tommy Hilfiger in 1987. And I think that Epstein really started to roll after.
Can I ask you a clarifying question about that, Nick? Because that is such an important detail. Most people don't realize that power of attorney, by my understanding, and I'd love for you to confirm this, was basically stating that Jeffrey Epstein could sell companies on behalf of Les Wexner. He could manage all of Leslie Wexner's money without Leslie present. He basically became completely in control over Leslie's entire fortune and empire. And the purpose of that, I would assume, is plausible deniability, so that Leslie Wexner can say he didn't know what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. Is that your understanding of that?
Well, I mean, yeah, in 1987, Wexner basically gave Epstein the keys to his kingdom, and Epstein could do whatever he wanted with that money. And I initially thought that it had to do with blackmail, but now I'm kind of leaning towards money laundering. And the media has been so disingenuous when reporting Epstein that Vanity Fair, which is a relatively sophisticated magazine, Vanity Fair did an article on Wexner and Epstein, and Vanity Fair, and you really can't make this up, Vanity Fair concluded that Les Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein the keys to his kingdom in 1987 because he was lonely. Because he was lonely.
Yeah. And it sounds to me, correct, maybe you're saying you think differently, Nick. Ryan, I'd love your take on this. My understanding is that Jeffrey Epstein, his general history is he started at Dalton School as a teacher doing a job he was not qualified for. And it became apparent at the school to students and other staff that he was overly interested in his students. And then he went into banking through some sort of relationship with a parent of a student or something like that, and got into banking at Bear Stearns, and spent a little while in the legal-ish banking world at Bear Stearns, exiting only when a scandal broke in the early 80s, if I understand correctly. And then there's this empty period in the middle of Jeffrey Epstein's life, which was sort of his lost years, after he left the legal banking world, before he officially entered the trafficking world, where my understanding is that he said he was like a financial bounty hunter. But it sounds to me like there's evidence that he was doing arms trafficking and money laundering for criminals. Ryan, do you have any insight on what that
with
lost
Doug
period
Leese,
was?
Ari Ben Menashe broke that. I want to say some stuff about Wexner first.
Yeah,
because
totally. Get into
Wexner is also who brought in Mike Jeffries, a pedophile from Abercrombie and Finch that was raping young men with
who
his
was just let
cohorts.
off on the dementia excuse.
Yeah. That's what Peter Nygaard should have went with too. It's another one of these weird serial rapists. Mike Jeffries and Matthew Smith and James Jacobson had a ring, and they're getting this Wexner money. And you always see Wexner and you always see Bronfman. And the Bronfman family is also hooked in with organized crime. And this is a generational thing. At least 3 generations of Bronfman's been doing that. That's who Charles Bronfman sold Robert Miller his house, the richest man in Quebec, who is now going to jail for pedophilia, who've been raping high school girls for years. His little threesomes in his hotels, and eventually he bought a house for it up there in Canada. That's another modern case. It won't get any attention. Nobody knows about Robert Miller. Very few people knew about Nygaard. Mike Jeffries was only in the news for like a day, and that story went away. But they all have ties to Wexner and Bronfman. Wexner was doing this crap before he basically got too old, and they passed the torch to Jeffrey Epstein. He put him on the board of the Wexner Foundation, which is also financing Israeli prime ministers and Israeli political races. But yeah, it wasn't just about blackmail. They rewarded people too. There are plenty of people who are ideologically in line with everything they were doing, and they would give them prostitutes because that's how these perverts are. But they were spying on U.S. science and technology. If you look at Epstein's list, he's not going after congressmen and stuff. I mean, there's Bill Richardson, and there's a couple, like there's a senator, there's a governor, whatever. But mainly, he was aiming at science and technology. They already own Congress with AIPAC. You don't need to like re-bribe people you completely control. And there's no reason to go after the interchangeables. People get voted in, voted out. What's the point? Go after the donor class. If you get the donor class already owns everybody under them. It's kind of like if you get Hoover, you get all the Hoover stuff.
Great point.
They go straight after the donor class, and that's what Epstein was doing. So when you see all these hedge fund managers and things, like these people, I got the list right here. I mean, it's not sexy names. Like when you like Jess Staley or Glenn Dubin are not big celebrities. They're not in Congress. They're not judges, whatever. What they are billionaires. That's why they matter. And what they are was Staley ran a lot of the hush money out of JP Morgan. He worked at Barclays for now, but whatever. It was being facilitated by people that worked at the banks. It was Ace Greenberg that recruited him from the Dalton School, like you said, because he could play piano or whatever. No, he was chosen. Like, you're going to put him at Bear Stearns. What's he going to do? Oh, he's going to have the everything job because he's not qualified to do any of the jobs other than being a notorious con man with no conscience. And they did shop him around. And like I said, Benashe said they had the proclivity toward the kitty fiddling. Maxwell's into that. She's bisexual. She hooks on to Epstein, totally in love with him. Her family notoriously been working for Israeli intelligence the whole time. Her father was an informant that told on Mordecai Vanunu, the whistleblower that filmed the warheads of Israeli secret and illegal nuclear program, threw him in jail. And when Maxwell died, the head of Shin Bet and the Mossad and the former heads had a memorial service for him. They only did that one other time, and that was for James Jesus Angleton, who was another grandfather of getting Israel the bomb. And all these JFK files just came out saying how they had been spying on Oswald for 4 years. And Angleton and Shackley in that group had essentially decided after Kennedy was dead that they were going to give all the trade secrets to the Israelis. And there again, it's science and technology that they want. Same thing with NSO, Promise Software, the Maxwell sisters are working on. The microwire case I talked to a lawyer for that, John Horatio, twice. We had long interviews. Problem is,
Ryan, you just
no one gets this information if it's coming from someone who's banned on all the platforms.
Yeah, we got to get it out. And I think that a lot of people think like you understand that it's kind of a foregone conclusion who he was working with and who he was working for because all the evidence is out there. But some of the sources, I think people don't realize how good of sources we have on some of this. And one you just mentioned is Ari Ben-Menashe, and another one that comes up in a similar way is Stephen Hoffenberg, which are both people that worked alongside Epstein and then later gave extensive testimony as to what Epstein was really up to, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, if someone in Israeli intelligence said he worked for Israeli intelligence, you know,
right,
like
so Ari
that. And you knew the Maxwells did. That's very well established.
Yep.
And you knew Wexner did. The founder of the Wexner Foundation, the very first president, Rabbi Herbert Friedman, is from the Sunborn Institute. The same, if you've seen my film Numek, you know what that is. Like that is something I fished out that other people plagiarize, but that is from the Sunborn Institute. He is the founder of the Wexner. He's the first president they chose. There's your overlap. And that goes in with Nathan Bernstein and the Jewish Agency and da-da-da-da-da.
So to clarify what you're saying, the Sonborn Institute was deeply involved in Israel acquiring through
Rudolf Sonborn was the organization inside the Americas that procured both finance and gun runners, mostly from organized crime. They used to meet at Hotel 14 to get weapons to Israel. So Charlie Winters and Hank Greenspun and all these different characters that were stealing conventional weapons to give them to Haganah and Irgun terrorist gangs, which formed the first government of Israel. Like Ben Gurion and Menachem Begin and all these people that end up being the heads of state for Israel started in the Haggadah Irgun's terrorist groups that destroyed Palestinians, and they were getting guns from all over the world, but principally from the Americas, because after World War II, you've got this huge surplus of weapons all over. The war is over, but you've got billions and billions of dollars of weapons all over the place, and black market sprung up immediately. And so you had the WAA, the War Assets Administration, that's supposed to be decommissioning weapons in the United States, for example. But immediately, because of the Cold War, what ends up happening on both sides, USSR and the United States, would kind of secretly, instead of ending the weapons trade, they managed it, just like the CIA does for drugs. Instead of stopping the drugs, they facilitate where they go and what those drugs finance. And these things overlap because the drugs pay for guns,
Yeah.
And so what they did is, if it went to a place then anti-communist, like KTM in China or something, they would allow it, because no matter if the mob was profiting from that, because it was helping to finance anti-communist, fighters, resistance, etc. And the Soviets were doing the opposite. If it was pro-communist, they allowed the gun flow that way. And the Israelis took advantage of this, and they did some nasty. Well, they weren't Israelis yet. What becomes the Israelis from these terrorist groups that did all manner of things. I mean, they blew up the SS Patria, killing other Jews on that ship, by the way, bombing the embassy in Rome, blowing up hotels, Deir Yassin massacre, where they beheaded 200 people and put Palestinians in cages and paraded them around Jerusalem, these kind of things.
And this
But
is
they're
all
getting
in
guns
the 40s,
from
the 50s and 60s, right?
Yeah, 50 and 40s too, barely. Like prior to 48, they were running guns there to create the state of Israel. And once they are a state, of course, these relationships don't end. But these people, they laundered money through Holocaust charities. And there were people in the US government that knew what they were doing, but allowed it. A lot of Christian Zionists agreed with it. They're like, well, that's their land. God gave it to them. It's in my magic book, blah, blah, blah. But
And it
it was
sounds like
just
they were
political
tied into the
suicide to
blackmail
accuse the
networks.
Holocaust charity of gun running, so they just let it go.
Yeah.
A number of people have said that Epstein was working for Israeli intelligence, which I don't doubt at all. But where I think that there's a nexus is I just don't see the CIA allowing Israeli intelligence to compromise American politicians and American power brokers on American soil without getting a cut of that intelligence. So I believe that it was a function of both Israeli intelligence and American intelligence working together.
Yeah. On this exact topic, we've heard some funny claims from people like Charlie Kirk that maybe he was Saudi intelligence. Is there
No.
any evidence in any regard that might suggest that Epstein was working for other intelligence services than Israel and the CIA?
James Woolsey and William Burns are both clients, and they were the heads of the CIA. So the first thing they did to get rid of the CIA is compromise the CIA.
Yeah. Yeah, and William Burns was the head of the CIA right up until the end of Biden, right?
I mean, Ehud Barat visited Epstein while he was in jail. Prime Minister of Israel is visiting this guy in jail and going to his rape mansion in New York.
So Ryan,
The
it sounds
Saudi
like you
kings didn't
believe that
visit
they
him.
compromised the CIA, and they sort of had the CIA kind of wrapped around them a little bit.
The CIA would never do anything against Israel anyway. Israel openly spies on the United States and bribes politicians every day through conventional means, and they don't do anything.
Yeah.
Do you think the CIA is going to allow Israeli intelligence to compromise American power brokers on American
Yes.
soil without getting a cut of that intelligence? Without getting a cut of that intelligence?
Absolutely.
Well, I think a flip of that question based on what Ryan is saying, Nick, is do you think that if Woolsey, for example, was compromised, do you think that that gives the Israeli networks enough leverage over CIA top brass to sort of force the CIA to work with them, but not really let the CIA hold any cards?
William Burns, who was head of the CIA throughout Biden administration, he met with Epstein on a number of occasions, and before he was CIA director. So there was already a relationship there between Epstein and William Burns. And William Burns has been very disingenuous about what he basically said that he met with Epstein because he wanted some financial consultation.
Changed his answer a few times.
Yes. But I have a tendency to believe that they're working together.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why I love this kind of a conversation, is because we know what evidence we can see, and people like you guys are the ones that see the most of the evidence. And and there are different takes within the experts that see the evidence, but some takes don't really exist. And the idea that he had nothing to do with Israel and nothing to do with American assets in some form, that doesn't really come up among experts at all. The idea, like I said, I've not seen any evidence that he was working for Qatar or any evidence that he was working for Saudi Arabia, right? It seems almost laughable when you've seen the evidence.
He did have a Saudi Arabian passport. We
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah.
But-
But he also had a few others too, right?
Yeah.
Running cover. And I mean, to be fair, he did work with Anand Khashoggi, in the Middle East. And you could say Anand Khashoggi's from Saudi Arabia, right? But my understanding is at the time this Anand Khashoggi was smuggling those guns, he often was working with Israel to smuggle guns on behalf of Israel as well, correct? So
And the Khashoggis had their little rape yacht too.
yeah, that our boy Trump later bought.
Yeah, disgusting.
Speaking of, I'd be really curious, just to piss everyone on the internet off, I'd be curious for each of your guys' take on the Trump association with Epstein, because everyone has a different take, and it seems like obviously he grew up around these networks at least. I personally don't really think he was compromised by it, because I mean, unless it's like this long play where he's like their guy to this day, because a lot of people were coming after Trump and nothing ever came out. But he certainly was friends with Roy Cohn. He certainly was friends with Epstein back in the day. He certainly learned from these networks at the very least. So I'd be curious, Ryan and then Nick, do you think that Trump actually did turn on Epstein and turned him in and was kind of part of helping to get Epstein taken down? Or do you think that's something else? What do you think is going on with Trump?
They didn't rearrest Epstein until they already had his replacement, because he was just getting a little too John Gotti. He's a little too flagrant with what he was doing and his name out there. And it was strike two at that point. So he was done. Trump, you don't have to dig that far when you say he's into this stuff. If you mean this stuff, like he's already family's married into the Kushner clan, and Charles Kushner went to federal prison for setting up honey traps on his own family. Well, he went there for, illegal campaign finances for Governor McGreevey, but in trying to sustain that and of the little subsidiaries he set up to donate money, he did some in his sister and brother's names without asking them. They weren't mad that he was blackmailing the governor. They were mad that they weren't getting their cut, so they turned on him. So he tried to blackmail his brother-in-law, set up a honey trap at the Red Bull Inn, 2-star motel because he's classy, and filmed him having sex with a prostitute that he paid. This is the kind of people. That's Jared Kushner's father, by the way, who's now in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump, he's got these weird Miss Teen pageants and stuff, and he's obsessed with these like pageantries of women. He's on his third wife, which is like consensual rape.
And Melania, my understanding is that Jeffrey claimed that he introduced Melania to Trump, right?
You can't believe anything Epstein said. It's possible.
Well
I mean, Trump slung his junk around pretty well on his own. They definitely were friends until he had a falling out with Wexner over a property dispute adjacent to Mar-a-Lago that they were getting on a fire sale, and Trump ended up with it. And that's where they started butting heads. And then also the Kushners and Epstein don't get along either. They are rival real estate tycoons in New York. Witkoff is in that group too. I mean, Steve Witkoff, everyone's like, oh, he's a special envoy of the Middle East. Steve Witkoff ran a gambling operation with Antonia Galupci out of Trump Tower that they sold to Israeli businessmen. This is all coming out in another film I'm doing. Like, this dude is mobbed up out of Atlantic City. And Trump too, with Tony Salerno and Bob Labucci and these people. They go to WrestleMania together, and he openly was renting out condos to mobsters that were running all kinds of illegal means, including prostitution, forced prostitution. And so it's
Ryan,
not clear that
sounds
Clinton or Trump were into kids, but they're definitely into young women.
Yeah, so it sounds like your take is that he's dirty, but he wasn't necessarily blackmailed by Epstein or like helping him run that scheme, but that doesn't make him clean in your book by any means. Is that a fair
everyone adjacent to him is involved in these crimes and things. Trump doesn't drink. He's got a certain kind of discipline. He seems to be after young supermodels, which is not illegal. It's not illegal to be a man whore. But he's like, okay with it if someone else does. He's like, I don't care if you bang a whore or whatever. So he's their front man, but I don't think he's ideologically in line with Israel. They got something on him because it's not in America's interest whatsoever. And they're being dragged into these forever wars right along the script. It's been there since at least 2001. And Wesley Clark's reading this.
So,
And
Nick, I'd be curious for your take on Trump and his connection and the evidence of his involvement here, flight logs.
Trump is an interesting case. When I acquired the Black Book in 2012, Alfredo Rodriguez had been the House manager, and he circled a number of names in the Black Book that he said had been in cahoots with Epstein. And Donald Trump was one of the circled names. None of the Epstein underage victims have come out that I know of and have named Trump, but Trump did lie about his relationship with Epstein. He said that he had never been to Epstein's home, but actually, in fact, he had been to Epstein's home. We saw that in a deposition from Mark Epstein. And then he had also flown on Epstein's plane from Florida up to New York. So he did have a relationship with Epstein. There's two stories that are going around. One is, and Ryan talked about the real estate deal that went awry that split Epstein and Trump. And the other one is that Epstein was trying to molest someone, an underage girl at Mar-a-Lago, and Trump got wind of it and then completely severed his ties to Epstein. So those are the two stories of why they were severed. But with Trump, he was president for 4 years, and he had an opportunity to go after the perps in the Epstein network. And this shows that it's both a Democratic and a Republican problem. Epstein was covered up by the George W. Bush administration. It was covered up by the Barack Obama administration. It was covered up by the Trump administration, and then it was covered up by the Biden administration. So 4 administrations have covered this up. And then Bonnie came out with her debacle that she was going to release the list, even though there isn't a list. But said she was going to release the list. It's not like there was a Jeffrey Epstein travel agency, and that Jeffrey Epstein had a list of the perps, and they were on his refrigerator with a magnet. That's not the case. But anyway, when the Black Book that I released has the names of a lot of perps in it, and the flight logs that I released in 2015 also had the name of a lot of perps. And as Ryan had said, we know who a lot of these perps are. It's just a matter of we should start indicting. Yeah. Epstein, the New York Times in August of 2019 had an article where they named Ghislaine Maxwell, Sarah Kellen, Marty Anasenkova, Adriana Ross, and a couple other Epstein's procurers, aka pimps. And the feds went after Maxwell, but there were 5 other pimps that were named in that article. And the New York Times showed how they played a role in the machinery of Jeffrey Epstein getting children. And if the Department of Justice really wanted to indict perps in the Epstein network, they would indict those women that the New York Times named as Epstein's procurers or pimps. And child trafficking is a heavy sentence in federal law. It's 15 to life. You put those 4 women who really know the entire operation. Haley Robson was named. She was getting kids from high school. I don't think that she really knew, but the other 4 knew. Yeah. And you could indict them tomorrow on multiple counts of child trafficking, which carries a 15 to life sentence. And once they were indicted, they would start rolling over on perps. Once they were looking at 10 lifetimes in prison, they would start definitely rolling over on the perps. So we have this situation where there was this Bonnie debacle, but what really gets lost is that we have the evidence to start indicting Epstein procurers and pimps tomorrow. If our government had the will, they could be indicted tomorrow.
They could have done it years ago.
The problem
And
is a lot of those people got immunity during the sweetheart deal.
that is true.
Sarah Kellen is probably, besides Maxwell and Epstein themselves, she's probably on the flight logs with them more than anyone else.
Yes.
It's like their secretary of their horror house and
Yep.
knows, a lot. And it's just walking around because Barry Kersher got them that deal. And as
Literally walking
Acosta
free.
said, he was told to back off because it's part of intelligence. Well, we weren't spying on ourselves. That was the Israelis.
Yep. And so you brought up something really important that I want to start digging into is that, Nick, you were talking about how we have a lot of the perps, but we also have a lot of the Johns, so to speak, known. And a lot of those Johns, I mean, we know that they committed crimes probably against children. Like one of the first names that comes to mind is Bill Clinton. But it's not just about holding them accountable for any crimes they might have committed against these girls, though that is important. But it's also important to understand just how deep does this compromise of our country go. And I think that that's the elephant in the room that our politicians don't want to acknowledge, because that starts to explain why nothing has been done. And I would love to just quickly run through some of the groups of characters that we seem to have a lot of evidence that they're compromised, and have you guys kind of break down just how much evidence there is for these various people. And I think Bill Clinton is a great place to start because he's literally the president of the United States of America. And Jeffrey Epstein was in his office 17 times that we know of. So what is like
Jeffrey Epstein was providing women to Clinton in the White House, not minors, but women.
Yeah.
And we know that they had their relationship continued after Epstein was busted by the the Palm Beach Police Department in 2005. So, and there's a picture of Chelsea Clinton getting married, and there is Ghislaine Maxwell right in the background. And
my understanding is that Epstein also helped set up the Clinton Global Initiative. Is that correct?
He played a role in that, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that people might push back on is, if I remember correctly, during Clinton's presidency, Israel wanted him to pardon Jonathan Pollard. And he wound up not pardoning Jonathan Pollard. Later on, Trump did that. But you might say that, well, if they'd had blackmail on Bill Clinton, he would have pardoned Jonathan Pollard. And I've always looked at the Monica Lewinsky scandal coming out right around that time, and Bibi Netanyahu somehow winding up with Monica Lewinsky tapes. And there's reporting from the Times of Israel that Bibi Netanyahu was threatening Bill Clinton with Monica Lewinsky tapes, sort of like 100 hours of phone sex or something like that. 30 hours, sorry, not 100. Are you guys under the impression that the Monica Lewinsky scandal was in some way tied to this blackmail ring, or do you think it was separate? And what's the deal with Jonathan Pollard? Like, what are some of the minutia about how Clinton actually acted as president towards Israel versus having a theoretical Israeli blackmail network totally controlling it?
Lewinsky was a shot across the bow.
Right.
And it wasn't about Pollard. They wanted Clinton to attack Iraq, which he did during his hearing, because when you have to get impeached and then it has to be confirmed. During the confirmation, which they did not do, he ended up not being confirmed. He did get impeached, though. He started bombing Iraq. And so they did not impeach him. And as soon as he got past that, he stopped the bombing of Iraq.
Interesting. So it seems like it was a bit of a game of chess going, of like, they ask him for something, he says no, they fire a warning shot, because the Monica Lewinsky thing is a perfect warning shot. And that's a phrase that I've also used about it, in that you don't want to expose your whole blackmail network. You don't want to expose what, like, the big crown jewel of your blackmail on the president of the United States, but you want to let him know that you're willing to release something. And so you release these BJ things, you release this little scandal, and you show him that you're serious, and then he starts to comply a little bit. And then it sounds like you're saying that after he had complied enough for them to, terminate the Monica Lewinsky attack angle, so to speak, then
they ruined the peace accords too, because you've got Ehud Barak and Clinton, and they had them both, obviously. And so there was no two-state solution for Palestine. There was a lot of different things, but Lewinsky was just the one the media knew about.
Yeah.
Because she saved the dress. Why is she just hanging out with a dress with the cum stain on it? Like, she was in on it.
And why is Epstein hanging a photo of Bill Clinton wearing that dress in his
Well, that was kind of
house?
a trophy. Yeah, he had a
Right?
bunch of paintings of things like that. But And that was the other stupid thing Epstein did. He was a trophy collector.
Yep. As they so
And he
often
would
are.
film all these things. Like, you can't have copies of these at your residence, moron. But he did. And the FBI grabbed that and they're just sitting on it. I mean, there's photos of the boxes of it with
So there might be no list, but
Glenn
there's
Dubin's
certainly
daughter.
tapes.
What's that?
There's no list, but there's certainly tapes. And they certainly
Yeah,
are
well,
government
there's no
confiscated
list like a folder like this with all the names on it. I mean, that would be the dumbest thing in the world. But like, let me write down everybody up. Yeah, right.
right?
The list is compiled from the victim statements. Like, you know, the black book and flight logs is a data point, but not everybody they knew is some pervert, and not everybody they flew with took the bait. I just wanted with this story with when Trump was on the plane. There's an account from a girl. Now I've forgotten her name, but one of the girls said she was from Ukraine, and they used the phrase "white trash," and she said, "What's that?" And Trump said, "It's me with no money."
Sounds like a
It's
very Trump thing to say.
pretty accurate, but
Yep.
yeah, I
You
mean,
guys
they
just mentioned Ehud Barak. Is there any evidence that Ehud Barak was being blackmailed by this very network, or does it seem like the evidence is that he was one of the handlers and one of the orchestrators? Or
we
maybe
certainly
both?
being bribed because they donated millions of dollars to him.
Ehud Barak is really dirty in this.
Oh yeah.
Really dirty.
Yeah.
And I believe that he was one of the perps.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was very kind to these Epstein victims.
Yeah.
But
Well,
we
he
made
also was a veteran of many very brutal wars and terror
Mhm.
campaigns throughout his life. Special ops in Israel, head of military intelligence for a little while, and to the same point, he co-invested with Epstein in a number of tech companies during Epstein's time and sort of after a lot of when the sensational Epstein stuff had happened. And that brings me to the next group of people that we should talk about, and that's the technocrats. That's the
Reporting
Elon Musks,
Carbine.
the Google founders, WhatsApp founders. That these people were very interesting to Jeffrey Epstein, and he really courted a lot of technologists. Do you guys have a perspective on the Larry Pages, the Elon Musks, these kinds of guys that seem to be in his orbit, but we don't necessarily, I'm not sure if we have any evidence that they were compromised or ever went to the island?
Sergey Brin definitely went to the island.
Yeah.
You know that. And
yeah, I've heard some pretty dark things about Sergey behind the scenes.
And Sergey was one of the founders of Google. There was a article published in 2001 by the UK's Evening Standard, and it talked about Epstein's relationship to Khashoggi and Prince Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell. It was probably the most honest article that's ever been written about Epstein.
Yeah.
And in that article, it says that Epstein and Gates were doing business in the 90s. According to the media, Epstein and Gates met in 2011. But according to that article, that didn't have an agenda, it was just reporting the facts, that Epstein and Gates, or Epstein and Gates met and were doing business in the 90s. So I think that that's a relationship that went very far back, that's remained for the most part clandestine.
Yeah.
A lot of Microsoft executives too, the case with Walker and Nathan Myhrvold and that, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation employees being caught with a trunket of child pornography on their work computers. These people are nasty, and Bill Gates writing about when he stayed late in the night at the Epstein property and about an attractive young woman. Like, what a weirdo.
Yeah,
Nick's right. They knew each other way before the 2000s, and it's not just Bill. It's like the whole upper brass of Microsoft was getting compromised. These nerds are easy pickings.
Yeah. And it's important to remind the audience too that Microsoft is not just a private sector tech company. Microsoft is one of America's largest government contractors for intelligence agencies and, all sorts of covert ops, like kind of networks and tech stuff. So that is not just a private company. That is a government operation that's being targeted as well.
Magellan software, it's not software, but search engine was, the Epstein sisters set that up in early internet.
And then that was sold to Microsoft. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but they, what was it, Netscape and stuff. There was early internet. There was only a few choices, and but they wrote Bill in early. That was the richest person in the world at one point.
Yep.
And he's having him donate on his behalf to MIT, for example, to Joy Ito.
Yep.
Epstein, they want his money, but they don't want it from him, not because they have a problem with it, but because it's bad PR to accept it from a convicted pedophile.
Yep.
So he would just have, like, Bill Gates is going to donate, and that's from me. He wants them to know, yeah, don't worry, I'm going to get the richest man in the world to donate to you on my behalf. Just flexing his, his guns to be like, I control Bill Gates. And this is what leads to his downfall, is doing stuff like this. Like, the really good heads of organized crime, you don't know their names because they don't showboat like this. Epstein got a little too arrogant, a bit too cocky when he's doing these kinds of things. But spying or donating to colleges is part of spying on research and development, because colleges and universities, especially MIT, they get government grants, which are used in partnerships with private companies to work on research and development for science and tech. And so if you can get through the university, don't, like I said, you aim for the donor backbone, then you control access to trade secrets that they develop there.
Yep.
And all of that stuff ends up in Israel. And as Snowden said, I mean, the NSA shares everything with Israel. They, like, American tech. I have a short film proving, like, the entire fighter jet program in China is sold to them by the Israelis, stolen from the United States. This is what they do.
Yep. Tech is one of their biggest exports. And speaking of the richest man in the world, at the time it was Bill Gates. Now it's Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is in some photos with Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm not really aware of the extent of evidence that Elon was connected to Epstein. Did he attend Edge Network things? Was Elon Musk in Edge, and did he have affiliations with Jeffrey Epstein? Can you guys elaborate on Elon's potential connections there?
I haven't really dug into Elon and Epstein. I mean, there are pictures of them together, and I'm not exonerating.
Yeah, a picture does not prove anything.
Yes,
and we don't mean to imply that.
There's a lot of people want to say guilt by association, but that's not necessarily.
And that only undermines the argument.
Yes.
Right. But there are others, like the Sergey Brins and the Bill Gateses, that there's far more evidence that they were involved. And one that
Leon Black took a business trip with Trump to Russia back in '96, and he definitely he's the head of Global Apollo, and he gave millions of dollars to Epstein.
Yep.
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
He gave $160 million to Epstein, and here again, the media
to an Epstein LLC.
Yeah.
The media is so disingenuous. According to the media, the reason why Leon Black gave Jeffrey Epstein $160 million is Jeffrey Epstein was going to help him with his taxes.
Leon Black running Apollo Global Management, one of the biggest private equity firms in the world.
Who worked for Black was Robert Kraft, and he's one of these perverts that helped get the sweetheart deal in Florida too. And that's a whole, like, each one of these people could have a long biography. Ian, you've probably seen me do that before. But Black also financed a lot of these pervert art schools in New York where they were recruiting girls. That's where they had Maria Farmer working for a while. That was him. Art is a great medium for laundering money. Ask Hunter Biden. And that's a lot of that was going on. Well, we're going to pay you for your painting or whatever.
And that's why Jeffrey Epstein frequented a lot of art houses, a lot of art auctions, Christie's, etc. Nick, you were about to say something?
Well, I was just saying, what the mainstream media came up with is so disingenuous, because a guy like Leon Black has an empire and he's got a battalion of accountants. Yeah. So to say that Leon Black gave Jeffrey Epstein $160 million because Epstein was offering him tax advice.
Another thing in similar vein that I always latch onto is how there's mainstream media reporting that Epstein was referring high net worth individuals to JP Morgan for banking services. And that's ridiculous, because a person like Bill Gates or Sergey Brin, or I forget the exact names of the tech billionaires that he was referring to JP Morgan for, because this was how JP Morgan covered their tracks of the business that they had done with Epstein, is they said that he was just referring these clients for banking services. But anyone can walk into JP Morgan and open a bank account. Certainly a billionaire can walk into JP Morgan and open a bank account. And so to me, that always sounded like what you do when you're dealing with crime is you need to know a guy to get a referral to the back door where you're going to get the criminal services of a banking institution like JP Morgan, probably money laundering. Is that your guys' assessment on that too?
Well, also, if you're using a bank to pay hush money to victims and you're moving money around for the Israelis, you can say, "Look, I can get some big names to have accounts with you, and
Hmm.
you make sure that we
Exchange of
keep things
favors.
our relationship the way it is."
Yeah.
And JP Morgan ended up giving the victims of Epstein millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Two
And
hundred
it's
and
crazy.
seventy million dollars. Yeah.
And speaking of victims of Epstein, Virginia Giuffre was recently in a really bad traffic accident. Have you guys paid attention to that story at all? And do you guys have any suspicions or concerns about that traffic accident?
Yeah, she was hit. She was in a car that was hit by another car, and you have to understand about Virginia. Like, this is a woman that was a victim of sexual abuse for years. She's not. Pe- I hate to say this, but people don't walk away from that psychologically clean. They
Yeah.
abused people have a lot to work out in their life, and she's lost her kids, and she wants to see them, and I think she took that tragedy as an opportunity to be like, "Oh, please bring my babies to me. I need to see them before I die," and just anything desperate, and just wasn't the case, but
The
which is
thing about
sad. But I give her a pass because of look at what she went through.
Oh, 100%.
and
Yeah.
the thing about Virginia Giuffre is she litigated against Maxwell, and Maxwell threw a bunch of reptilian lawyers at her, and she stood strong and named
Yeah.
a bunch of perpetrators, and she won. So Virginia, for a victim who has been abused, like Virginia's been abused, and she was abused before she met Epstein,
That's right.
for her to stand up against a battalion of really vicious attorneys that Maxwell had hired is really commendable.
Yeah.
Really commendable.
And it wound up giving us a huge amount of the evidence that we now have to go on in that
Yes.
court testimony, because
Yes.
a lot of the evidence
Yeah.
that is sort of solid is the stuff that has been vetted in a court of law and cross-examined by lawyers, right?
She
And
took
so it
down
takes
Prince
great
Andrew
people like
too with
that.
that $16 million
Yes.
lawsuit, and she
Yeah.
was very clever. It wasn't Stockholm syndrome, it was like fake Stockholm syndrome. She gained their trust enough to get that Polaroid. "I just want a picture of the prince to show my mom." And she held on to that. It's like you're on Maxwell's property with a 17-year-old kid, which,
Yep.
is not illegal in the UK, but it is illegal to force anybody to do anything.
I,
With Prince Andrew, take a little bubble bath and a 2 minutes of sex or whatever, but she took him down.
Yep.
And he gave the most notorious train wreck interview ever. It was
Oh, yeah.
unintentional comedy.
Yep.
It's one of the best ever. And then hearing Eric Weinstein talk about it's funny too. He's like, "No one's that stupid." Like, yes, they are.
Yep. And actually, that interview specifically that you're referring to links up to an interesting character that does not get nearly enough press. And so the interview you're referring to was when Prince Andrew needed to sort of apologize for coming to Jeffrey Epstein's get out of jail party, right? After Jeffrey got out the first time that
Oh
time.
yeah. It
And
was
that
unbecoming.
party and that party was organized. It was the famous one where Stephanopoulos was there, Prince Andrew was there, I think Katie Couric was there. So it was very weird. But that party was organized by Peggy Segal, which was who's a
Yeah.
Hollywood promoter, super, super hotshot, like one of the most famous Hollywood superstar promoters there is. And she's famous for having this contact book of 300,000 of the most powerful people in the world that she'll get to your Hollywood premiere if you want to make a movie go
Music industry
Oscars,
too.
right?
Yeah.
And she got blacklisted really hard from Hollywood when Epstein, went down. And I suspect it's because of her contact book and because she was the one letting him into these parties and doing a lot of the intros and kind of Hollywood moving and shaking with him. Do you guys know anything about Peggy Segal? And is
What was
there,
Katie Couric getting or giving the foot massages? I heard
I
she's
do
into
not
feet.
know.
That's the rumor around Charlottesville. She's a foot lady.
And Nick, do you know anything about Peggy?
I haven't really delved into her at all.
Yeah,
No.
Peggy really avoided a lot of the spotlight, and I cannot help but wonder if that's intentional. And I always wonder how many people like her are out there that sort of avoided the spotlight that might have a huge amount of dirt and a huge amount of guilt. And I think that in her case, she got blacklisted and she was like complaining. She did a big media piece, I think with Vanity Fair, complaining about how all the boys are still out there having their careers and they're walking free, but I'm just this poor woman that got blacklisted and I was just his friend. But I think that in her case specifically, everyone was scared about that contact book and about the because Jeffrey Epstein was moving through vast networks of people and he was not alone, right? And it sounds like you guys are supposing that this is just one blackmail network of probably several that are running concurrently. Do you guys, how many blackmail networks do you think are out there right now? Like,
We just
I
follow the
have,
Bromptons because they finance a lot of them. So does Wexter. I mean, the center of the spider web are these the billionaires, the ones that get left alone. The cutouts are people like Jeffrey Epstein, or if you want to rewind, like Mr. Baker and people like that.
yeah,
Like these guys, Schoenstein's another one. Like these people are all over the place. But if you really want to find the party organizers for the music industry in Hollywood, all you look at the after parties for giant events, for something like the Super Bowl, for example.
yeah,
Who decides which musicians get to go to the Super Bowl? Well, Jay-Z. And they're going to go ahead and say, oh, you want to be in the Super Bowl? You want to be in the Super Bowl after party? Well, what's at the Super Bowl after party? A bunch of escorts. And they go to whatever city it's in, whatever city that ends up in benefits greatly from having the Super Bowl in it. But so do all the escort services around that city. I mean, they all flood in to meet these celebrities. And inevitably at these things, you're going to get compromise on anybody. And they get it sometimes without any specific goal in mind. They just want to have it to have control over these rich people because if somebody becomes like Kanye, for example, who has a lot of money, a lot of clout, and a lot of fame, you can't allow someone in that position who might then run their mouth politically. So they get dirt on people so that they can never stray, that they'll always, look at all of them that went to Kamala's
yeah,
events and stuff. Like they're going to show up and do whatever you want because you got everything on them. That casting couch is in the music industry just as much as it is in Hollywood. And one of these people, another friend of Ehud Barak, it was Harvey Weinstein. I mean, he hired Black Cube to harass his victims at the behest of the former Prime Minister of Israel. Now, he wasn't jailed over anything related to Epstein. He got his own casting couch proclivities got him in trouble. But I will say this, every time, and this is people are gonna get real mad about this, but I'm gonna say it anyway, that's me. Every time a celebrity is taken down, like a P. Diddy or something that's famous, a majority of the women that come out saying he did this, he did that, are gold digging fakes. And that's just inevitable. But that does not mean there aren't real victims. And I have to say this because what will happen is you can point to a few in a row and debunk them and be like, this girl's just after money. And that's true. And these women make it so much harder on the actual victims of rape and grooming because they're going to come out and there's like anybody that ever even knew somebody and be like, oh, yeah, me too, because they're after that cash.
Oh, we're getting payouts now, huh?
They did that to Bill Cosby and many other examples like that. You see it with Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, they went all the way back to like his high school trying to accuse him. So you have to pay attention to the false accusations of rape too. That happened. Michael Jackson, who I think was innocent, the moment a name comes out, then it's like, and they settle like, oh, he's going to pay. Well, just that guy's got enough money. If we accuse him and we don't ask for too much, he'll just pay to make the headache go away. So that is also an element in these things. And some of Harvey Weinstein's victim, and that guy, fuck Harvey Weinstein, he did it. But some of the women that were accusing him of things perfectly willingly did that to get a role. And it wasn't like horrifying for them. They did it for the money and they're adults and they did that on their whores.
Nick, it looks like you got something to add there.
A couple of things I want to mention. It's rare, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's rare that sexual assault victims lie about that.
Yeah, true victims.
There was, now he's a district court judge, or maybe he's retired. His name was Patrick Shills, and he represented 500 priests. He represented Catholic dioceses being sued by 500 people that alleged that priests had sexually assaulted them. And he was being interviewed by the New York Times, and he said that he felt, and he dealt with 500 cases, and he said that he felt that like less than 2% were lying. He did think that some of them were lying, but he said less than 2%. And I think that that's true because if someone comes out and says, I was sexually assaulted, they're going to have to go through difficult times. I mean, like we were just talking about Virginia Giuffre, they're going to have to go through some vicious attorneys, and a lot of the time. So I think it's rare that people lie about being sexually assaulted. I think it happens. And here's a nexus between Epstein and Diddy. And I think Ryan has touched upon it, but I believe that the reason why Epstein got taken down and why Diddy got taken down, and Diddy was also a blackmail operation, is that there was just too much media on them. You cannot be a blackmail artist if there's a lot of media on you. And with Jeffrey Epstein, the media was because of civil lawsuits were piling up against him. And the same thing was happening with Diddy. Civil lawsuits were piling up against him. There was, when Diddy got taken down, there was 8 lawsuits that were against him. And 2 of them had been minors. And one was a hip hop producer named Little Rod, who was talking about Diddy trafficking minors. So, and that never came up. But
well, Diddy sued a liquor company. You don't bite the hand that feeds.
An interesting element here is Epstein, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York was Damian Williams. And he oversaw the Maxwell trial, which was a very carefully choreographed trial. Only 4 victims of Epstein and Maxwell were called to testify, and they'd only been molested by Epstein and Maxwell. So they didn't know of the perps in the network. They just knew about Epstein and Maxwell. And so that was very, as I said, very carefully choreographed. And he was the same U.S. attorney that oversaw the grand jury that indicted Diddy. And both Maxwell and Diddy were indicted on conspiracies. Maxwell was indicted on a number of conspiracies, and Diddy was indicted on a racketeering conspiracy. But no one else was indicted. And Damian Williams, if you look at his history, he is really dirty. Now he's resigned from, and the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York is generally considered the most powerful federal law enforcement individual in New York City. So he was in that position, and he made sure that Epstein was covered up, and he made sure that Diddy had been covered up. Yeah. And I think that Diddy, now this is just my extrapolation, I think when Maxwell was taken down, she got the talk. In the Franklin scandal, there were 2 primary pimps, Craig Spence and Lawrence King. Craig Spence killed himself, and Lawrence King did some time. And when he got out, he was taken care of by a BMW dealer. He had a no-show job at a BMW dealership in Alexandria, Virginia. And I think the talk was given to Lawrence, this is what we're going to do. You're going to have to do some time. You're going to keep your mouth shut. And if you don't, you're going to end up like Craig Spence. I think the same thing happened with Maxwell. And Maxwell, she was guilty. She could have been indicted on multiple counts of child trafficking, but she only got 20 years. And she was put into a dormitory environment, which are very cush in the federal system. And usually the only prisoners that get put in dormitory style situations are prisoners that have done time, have been exemplary, and are nearing the end of their bid. And then they get put into a, so Maxwell was transitioned to one. And I think the same thing happened with Diddy, is he was given the talk. If you open up your mouth, then you're not going to be around much longer. But if you keep your mouth shut, you're going to do some time, and we'll let you and your family keep your money.
Yeah, and not to mention that they also could easily be threatening these people's families that are on the outside, yes. Because clearly a network that can traffic children, that can control law enforcement, that can control prosecutions, clearly they have the ability to do other horrible things to your family members that are outside as well. So they have a lot of power to keep people quiet, to coerce people to testify in certain ways, to kind of pull a lot of strings in a lot of directions, right?
Yes, and I do believe that it was the civil lawsuits that were piling up against both of them and the media. And as I said, you just can't be an effective blackmailer when your name's in the newspaper every day.
Do you guys believe that this network already had a replacement for Jeffrey Epstein and already had a replacement for Diddy lined up, and that
Also,
it's still
Rodney
going on?
Jones kept receipts. He had pictures of what was going on.
Yeah,
So that's
no,
gonna be
Rodney
hard.
had Rodney
Yeah.
has pictures.
You
I've
think
been
Diddy might have caught
told.
them by surprise?
What was that?
I was going to say, Ryan, do you think that Diddy might have kind of caught them by surprise by how hard Rodney Jones's lawsuit came out and how quickly it kind of toppled Diddy? They weren't necessarily ready for that to happen so quickly, but when it did, maybe they had to pull the plug because it was just too much heat too quickly.
It was definitely bad, but I mean, they released a tape of him beating the shit out of his girlfriend after he sued the liquor company. That suddenly was news. That had been done forever. They've been sitting
Well
on that
said.
tape forever. That comes out after he bit the you don't go liquor companies. You don't do that.
He'd already been.
He thought, "I'm a billionaire, I can do what I want." Like, nobody, but you notice it never goes to Wexner, it never goes to Clive
Yeah.
Davis, it never goes to the people above them, the real movers and shakers. It's always the cutouts that go to jail, and like Nick said, they kinda isolated it, like, it's just gonna be Maxwell and Epstein. It's just gonna be Diddy and not the network. And the things that the victims say, it's all redacted. So when they're telling on people, it doesn't matter. And it's like, how many Epstein victims did go to the cops, did go to the FBI, and it didn't matter?
Yeah.
You
One
touched
thing I
on.
want to talk about before we get into kind of the bird's eye view, kind of overarching big picture wrap ups here, is we've not mentioned Zorro Ranch at all. And Zorro Ranch often gets left out of the discussion because it's not the island and it's not Palm Beach. But Zorro Ranch was really sinister. And Jeffrey Epstein bought this property and then built a private airstrip on it. And there's all kinds of speculation about what was happening
And
at
had the
Zorro
zoning
Ranch,
laws changed because he blackmailed the governor.
right?
He
Do you
had
have any
both,
insight there?
he was providing victims to both governors, Bruce King and Bill Richardson.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He didn't even have to register as a sex offender in New Mexico.
Yeah. Do you guys have any knowledge of any comprehensive search of the New Mexico property or any understanding of the rumors about what was going on in the basements there and stuff like that? Or
Well, the problem with the search on all the properties after New York is they waited months to do it. By the time they got to the Paris property, there was nothing there. They had gone over that with a fine-tooth comb, and then they destroyed the property in Florida. They physically destroyed it. And so by the time they searched New Mexico, you had a property in Ohio too that no one talks about. Then when they went through these, everything had been cleaned up. They're like, here, so they got that cachet of documents that Sergeant Dawson wasn't allowed to mention in the Maxwell trial, by the way, but we have photographs of it that disappeared for a little while where Darren Endike and Khan took it and brought it back. Like, I'm sure nothing's missing. So the search of Zorro Ranch, I don't imagine would come up with much because they had time to remove everything. They even shipped shredders and concrete to the island.
yeah.
Like, they got rid of everything down there because they know how deep and how bad this was.
Why would they ship concrete to the island? What do you think they were using concrete to cover up at the island?
There were tunnels in that
Yeah.
island. And here's something that's interesting about the New Mexico ranch. Julia Bryant was really a very honest, caring person. And she was really damaged by Epstein and Maxwell. She lost consciousness, and I don't really know why or what happened to her, but she lost consciousness when she was in New Mexico. And she came to, and she said that she was in what she felt was in a basement. And there was a female doctor that was harvesting her ovums. And Dolly the sheep was cloned, I believe, in 1996, and it's relatively easy to clone an individual. A human can be cloned for $1.5 million, and actually, people in New York City pay up to $60,000 to clone their French bulldog that they like so much. To clone someone, you just have to take the DNA out of the ovum, and then you insert the DNA that you want into the ovum, and then it's done through an electrical charge, which starts the mitosis process. So as soon as Dolly, and this is before I got into all this crazy stuff, but as soon as Dolly the sheep was cloned, I kind of thought to myself, there's got to be megalomaniac billionaires out there that are cloning themselves.
Yeah.
And according to Juliet Bryant, they were harvesting her eggs and why else would they harvest her eggs?
And Jeffrey
Obviously
Epstein was
they were fun.
he was very openly interested in genetics. He was courting geneticists all around the world. He was flying them to his island for private conferences. He was
He wanted to
openly
freeze
talking
his
about
brain and
wanting to,
penis.
yeah, he was openly
Yeah.
talking about wanting to like artificially inseminate many women at once, allegedly, according to quotes that people say he said. He clearly had that sort of eugenicist bent to him. And my understanding is there's multiple people that have talked about that aspect, both of Zorro and of his personality and interests.
I don't sign off on the tunnels because I don't see the point when you're already on an island. You're already private, and you're going to go below seawater. Uh, it's unclear what they're using covering up. Like any shred of DNA, they're going to paste over it, whatever they're doing down there. But he did have a music room, and it was a music room. None of the victims has said I was in a super secret dungeon on the island or anything. The island itself is a dungeon.
That's true. Another thing that I've never heard alleged around the Epstein network is I've never heard any allegations, which maybe, I mean, like victims that die don't have allegations, but
Sure.
I've never heard any allegations of like, like for lack of a better term, like brown trafficked children, migrant trafficked children, even though we know that there's always been a large flow of migrant children being trafficked into the sex trades over our southern border. Do you guys have a different take on that? Because my understanding is that the Epstein network was essentially specifically targeting mostly white and European children.
Epstein, actually, one of Epstein's procurers, high school procurers, brought African American girl to Epstein's home, and Epstein told her not to bring any African Americans again. So yeah, I think that Epstein was primarily into Caucasians. He was, as I said earlier, he and Brunel were buying children, which is kind of a very strange concept, buying children in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And if you look at trafficking statistics, and I've been in this for like 23 years, and I've spoken at a number of anti-trafficking conferences. Generally, 85%, that's the number. It might be higher or lower right now, but that's a number. 85% of children that are trafficked in America are American children. And people might think that they're Eastern European children or Mexican children. And I'm not saying that those children are trafficked too, but I think the vast majority of children that are trafficked in the US are American children.
Do we have any sense of how many trafficked children die and we never hear about, which obviously is an impossible statistic to have any firm numbers on, but do you guys have any sense from your experience working with this topic and researching and learning about these people and all these networks? Do you have any sense of how many victims might be dying and never actually seeing the light of day, so to speak?
When you get into the macro trafficking problem, it's actually pretty stunning. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 25% of underage girls and 5% of underage boys in the US have been molested. So that's over 50 million Americans have been molested as minors. And the Department of Health and Human Services estimates that the number of trafficked children and women in the United States is between 240,000 and 325,000 every year. And this is where it gets kind of mind-boggling. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, only 523 individuals nationwide were convicted of child sex trafficking in 2023. And although millions of images of child rape material infest the internet, according to the US Sentencing Commission, only 1,408 individuals in the US were convicted of crimes entailing child rape material. So we have this huge population of Americans that have been molested, and we have this huge population of Americans that have been trafficked. And we're only seeing 523 individuals convicted for trafficking, even though it could be as high as 325,000 or higher. So our government hasn't done a very good job taking care of children. When I wrote America's Children Trafficked Tragedy in 1995, as I said, it was about lower socioeconomic children. And when I wrote it, 25% of children were living below the poverty threshold. 10 million of them didn't have health care. A number of them were at risk for hunger. So, and those numbers have gotten a little bit better, but actually the fastest growing segment of the homeless population is families with children at this point. So as a society, we're not taking very good care of our children. What we see with the children who are living below the poverty threshold, the children that are homeless, it's kind of like a wholesale destruction. And what we see with Epstein and the child trafficking and the child rape material, it's a retail destruction. Where there is a wholesale destruction, there's a retail destruction.
Very well said. Yeah, it's
When it
almost like the
comes,
wholesale creates the marketplace from which the retail destruction, the trafficking networks, pluck their victims. Sorry, Ryan, I interrupted you.
no, it's fine. It's when it's I don't get the visual cues so well anymore. I can't tell it's speaking, but when it comes to sex trafficking, part of the reason it's mostly whites is one is access. I mean, you need places like Eastern Europe, or there were some Thai victims with Epstein too, and that's because it's easy to get them. But another reason is because a lot of the Johns, that's what they prefer. They want to rape young white women. Some of that may be that's what they like aesthetically, or because a lot of the Johns are white themselves, and it's just the ones that have money want the kind of girls that they saw when they went to high school or whatever's in the pervert's mind. They want to copy that so they can go out their fantasies and stuff. Jess Staley used to dress them up like Disney princesses, so part of it's that. But you see the same thing in Asia. They're raping other Asians. In China, they get a lot of girls from North Korea and stuff because one, availability, and two, that's the what they want. Now, but it all depends on the John. Like Peter Nygaard raped a lot of black women in the Bahamas. Like he was down with the brown, that was his thing.
And he's
His
on
was
video
feeding
saying some
himself.
really weird stuff about it.
Oh, yeah, he was into scat and diaper
Yeah.
parties and
Yeah.
6.9 and all that stuff. Double red beard. Yeah, gross. But yeah, it is a lot of young white women, but that too has its roots in the aftermath of World War II. You had a lot of most of Europe was destroyed, and this happened after the Iraq War too, where women turn to prostitution and men become mercenaries. And as far as a lot of the male traffic victims, you do see a lot of that from like young Sudanese and Somalis and stuff that end up as child soldiers and things for the men. And it's every color; it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But predators and also serial killers generally molest or kill people that are in the same race as them. That happens much more often than not.
So we're getting into this big picture where we live in a world where we have mountains of evidence of crime in broad daylight that the whole American public knows. Like it's a meme to say that Epstein didn't kill himself, and embedded in that meme is the idea that our government, or a government, probably partially the Israeli government, conspired to kill him inside of a federal prison. And embedded in that is this whole conceptualization that everyone kind of knows that there's a massive cover up going on right in front of our eyes. And everyone sort of knows that it's a cover up of the raping and trafficking of children to all of these rich elites. And even if people aren't familiar with the details of all the elements of this network, they at least are familiar with the allegations that Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, was involved, and Bill Clinton, the president of the United States, was involved. And so the cognitive dissonance around this issue is staggering. And I think that everyone deep down in their souls knows that you can only have that kind of a cover up and this kind of a non-justice about it if how do you cover that up if our entire American state at this point is still not in some way compromised by this network? Are you guys of the opinion that this network, this organized crime trafficking network, is in cahoots with our government to this day, and it's still operating and covering itself up to this day? Like, how do you get this cover up?
Well, the thing is, like, you have Epstein used what do you call it, the Science Foundation LLC to bribe Palm Beach police. So this is a foreign state. They are having to bribe local police. It's not like our government's in on it. He does have to bribe them. He does have to compromise them. He doesn't have to do that in Israel. Like, they do whatever they want. They really didn't have to do that in France either, because the French government they're pretty lenient on child predators and stuff. Like a lot of the people that Dershowitz represented just end up in France and never extradited.
Well, there's a lot of stuff
And
that's
I
been
don't
coming out about
understand
the
stuff
French
like Woody
presidents lately.
Allen, like marries his adopted daughter. Like, how does that guy get to see daylight? Like, it's
Yeah.
just disgusting. He absolutely groomed his own kid,
Yeah.
and he's friends with Epstein too. So it's a hard thing because I think a lot of these people, if you look at and you listen to the women, especially in the 80s and before, that work at these huge financial institutions, Bear Stearns, we can pick on some more. They've been saying how perverted these people are. Their boss would undress in front of them, and just the work environment, because they're just used to it. There's so many women that will climb the social ladder by showing some leg that the line gets blurred, and these guys just get used to treating women like commodities. That doesn't mean they invest in with 12-year-olds or whatever. Some of them go that deep, but the culture in BlackRock and Vanguard and some of these very, these institutions with very wealthy individuals, they surround themselves with legal prostitutes and sugar babies and stuff so much that they become unable to tell the difference between like a quote unquote regular woman and a sugar baby. And it's just the culture around these people. And so a lot of them won't point the finger at prostitute because they're like, well, we all do that. Everybody does that. They don't even get mad when one of them gets caught. You see how quiet the rest of them are. You see that in the Diddy case too. Like you see some people, man, F that guy, blah, blah. And you see a lot of celebrities like real quiet about it. All his friends like, well, I didn't know, because they all do this stuff.
Yeah.
Corey Feldman was right.
I blame the
And
media.
he's a little Fruit Loopy because he was abused as a kid, but he tried to tell people. And what was sad is when he finally did, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
Too
And that
often
was
it
his
doesn't.
biggest fear. Yep.
Nick, you said you blame the media. Could you elaborate on that a little
I
bit?
blame the media. No one in the media, no one has called for justice in the Epstein case. The media kicks out, as I said earlier, disingenuous articles and salacious dirt. It really loves to kick out salacious dirt, but not one major media entity has called for justice in the Epstein case. There
Not
was
one major media outlet said anything when Trump said we're going to move 2 million people out of Gaza, Trail of Tears style.
Yeah.
They didn't say a thing. Anything that has anything to do with Israel, they're not going to touch it with a 6 million foot pole. But they're very interested in the Tate case. Like these guys got exonerated from Romania, and all they're doing as American citizens were like coming to Florida. That's all, just going to land there in a plane before they cross the ocean. Donald Trump, who was meeting with the Prime Minister of Britain in the White House to discuss Ukraine's security, gets interrupted by the press to tell him, did you know the Tate brothers are on the way? And at the same time, the governor of Florida gets interrupted at his press conference and go, did you know the Tate brothers are on the way to Florida, to your state? Oh my God, they're accused. Like, look, the head, the president, the prime minister, and a governor got interrupted to know that these guys exist. And when you say human trafficking, that's the names everybody knows. So the media is really interested when it's wrong, when it's not the Israelis, but when it is, there's people who spoke against the Israelis. Oh, they are you. It's always accusing people of your own crimes, right? They're always guilty of their own accusations.
With this, and when I was pitching the Franklin scandal in like 2003, 2004, I had a lot of connections in the New York media. That's where I live. And I would talk to editors about it. And at that point, when I was pitching editors, I had a list from the grand jury documentation. I had a list of 60 victims, and I had a lot of evidence that I could show these editors. And I would lay it out to them, and I could just see the wheels spinning. And they would think to themselves, and you talk about cognitive dissonance, they would think to themselves, this is really a horrible story. I should help Nick Bryant out. Or I can write Nick Bryant off as crazy and have a nice dinner with my family tonight. And I've experienced so many difficulties. About last January, there was an Epstein document done. The January before this last January. And CNN contacted me because I put out the Black Book, and they wanted to have me come into the studio and give my feedback about what was released. And I was texting with the producer throughout the day, and it seemed like they were pretty hot to have me on. And then I started an organization called Epstein Justice, where we're trying to actually get justice for the Epstein victims and make sure that the prosecutors are prosecuted, or make sure that the perpetrators are prosecuted. So I texted him and I said, I'd also like to talk about Epstein justice. And then about 5 minutes later, I got a text saying, Nick, we're going to go another way.
No
And that has
way.
happened to me with the mainstream media before, where I talk about, where I'd say, I really want to talk about Epstein justice. And that's it.
Classic. Well,
The media
Nick,
does not.
I really want to talk about Epstein justice, Nick. Could you please tell us about Epstein justice and what the goal is of Epstein justice? Because I feel like now is a perfect time to tell the world a little bit more about Epstein justice and what we might actually be able to do as a culture and as a country to try to force a hand here, to try to do something what our government and our media won't do for us.
Well, we have to do something. We cannot have a government. If you, in the very least, if you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. So right now, our government is aiding and abetting child trafficking. And myself and some like-minded people, we've come together, we've formed a nonprofit, a 501c3, and we want a congressional commission to independently investigate Epstein. And we want two very simple things. We want to know why the government covered up child trafficking, and we want the perpetrators to be indicted. Very simple. We just want to know why the government covered up for child molesters, and we want to know, we want the perpetrators who were molesting children to be prosecuted. You'd think that that would be kind of a slam dunk. Now, what we need to make that happen, and some people think I'm Sisyphus and I'm pushing a rock up a mountain that's just going to come back down, but I believe in trying to do the right thing. For us to have an independent congressional commission, we have to have a majority in the House and we have to have a majority in the Senate to vote for that. And people can go to the Epstein Justice website. And
what's the URL of Epstein Justice?
What's that?
What's the URL of the website for people?
Justice.com.
EpsteinJustice.com.
And we're singling out all of our representatives and all of our senators. And actually on the 22nd, we're having our first webinar on how we're going to affect change. This is something that I can't walk away from. I've been at this. I started to dig into Franklin in 2002, and I've come across a number of networks over the last 23 years that have been covered up. And with Epstein, it's our best chance to really make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. And some people might think I'm delusional, but I really want to give this my best shot and do the right thing.
If we never try, we'll never get anything done, right?
Exactly.
Nick, are there any congressmen and senators that are already on board that have already expressed any support for Epstein justice? Are there any that are supportive at all?
We've reached out to some and they haven't said no. So, and actually next week I've got a meeting with senior staff member of a senator that I think is very sympathetic to the
Cool.
Epstein justice cause. And we talked about this earlier, but this is something that really bothers me. When Epstein was incarcerated, the FBI drilled his safe, which in his safe was like a walk-in closet. And they found hundreds, if not thousands, of images of child rape material. And what really bothers me about this is when we're talking about thousands of images of child rape material, think of all the victims that were used to make this child rape material that Epstein had. And because the government has covered up the perpetrators and the pimps, I'm willing to bet everything that I have that the government has not reached out to any of these victims that have been used for Epstein's child rape material. And I think when people come to realizations like that, I think we can get a groundswell, but this is going to be a grassroots movement. It's not going to be an easy slog, but and it's going to be grassroots. But what gave me hope about this, when Bonnie came out with her nothing sandwich, I saw both the right and the left light up on X. And I think that this is an issue that can bring the right and the left together, that children shouldn't be molested with impunity and that the government shouldn't aid and abet child molestation. I think that that's something, and it's probably the only issue right now that can bring the right and left together.
Yep. And if children being raped and molested can't bring the country together, then that's not a country that I can stand with, right? That's a bottom line for any civilized culture and society. So just to reiterate, that's
Children being blown
EpsteinJustice.com.
to bits and rubble dropped on them doesn't bring
Yes,
the country
sir.
together. So,
That's well
if
said.
that doesn't move the needle, nothing's going to move the needle.
That's well said. But I am of the firm belief that we can all push. We can push. And it might have been you, Ryan, that initially cued me into the quote that the quote you always did cue me into is that a lie needs to be told 1,000 times, but the truth only once. But another one is just that politics is downstream of culture. And if we don't culturally push, if we don't culturally change, if we don't push on our politicians from below, then they have no reason to change. So one more time, that's EpsteinJustice.com, and you can sign up for Nick's webinars where he's going to be training sort of citizen activists in order to build this grassroots network in order to push on our government from the bottom up, from hundreds, hopefully thousands of nodes of all of us. So I'm signed up for some of those, and I would love for other people to sign up for those too.
I'm going to share that link right now.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And then Ryan, as we're kind of wrapping up here, Nick, I'll let you kind of finish what you're saying here, and then I'm going to just kind of make sure that you guys can both get a chance to tell people where they can follow you guys and support your work also, because journalism doesn't pay for itself, and doing real journalism is not a lucrative industry in this modern age. And actually talking about the real stuff, the hard stuff, that is not the same as getting views on social media and getting clickbait on X and YouTube. And so it's really important that people support real journalists like yourselves. So Nick, I would love it if you would, any closing thoughts, and if you would tell people where they can support you as well.
Well, our government is a cesspool, and we know it's a cesspool. A lot of people know that it's a cesspool. Epstein is there, and as was said earlier, it was covered up in broad daylight. We need to do something about it. And you're right, Ian, this was not the best career move for me. Tackling this stuff.
I'm just glad you're still alive, Nick.
But you can find me at nickbryantnyc.com. I'm on Twitter. But the most important thing is EpsteinJustice.com. I would tell everybody, please go to EpsteinJustice.com and let's turn this around. It's not too late. We can turn this around.
Yeah. And Ryan, I know that you've got some great resources for people available that can help educate people, can help people can share with others. How can people find your work and help support what you do after this is over?
I literally mapped it out. And even myself, because the Epstein is so many names and such a big network that I'll forget stuff sometimes, and I'll look at the map I have right there on my door and go, oh yeah, that asshole did this. It just reminds me of it because it's so big. And I started mapping out a lot of stuff like that. I had videos from like 2007 to like 2021 periodically talking about Epstein. I did like 9.5 hours worth of stuff with Sean Atwood. All of it got removed. They erased all my channels, and they erased all of his videos with me off his channel. It's on Odyssey or whatever, but nobody can find that, like you'd have. So what I've done now is I have a Substack, ryandawson.org, and that's where we put all the big boy stuff. And then Telegram and X is whatever, because the audience on those things is, it is what it is.
Yeah.
A lot of people are just learning, or they got red pilled too fast. They say a bunch of edgy stuff, but like for the adult stuff, go to Substack, ryandawson.org. And then I have antineocon.com, which does have a lot of Epstein stuff, but really just anti-war in general, because you can't divorce the two things. A lot of the things that lead to the conditions where you can grab a bunch of children, or warp them into modeling agencies, and what all the things they're doing are these stupid wars. Like, people get in desperate situations. and they're economically broken, and that's what leads one thing. And war itself is just bad as it is. So if you're interested in either one of those things, ending these wars and stopping pedophiles, RyanDawson.org is the spot. The store is antineocon.com, where what I'm wearing today is on there.
Yeah.
But that's not why I made it. Like, I sell it at cost pretty much. It's it costs a lot now because of the tariffs. I had to make them in China because I live in Asia. So like, if I lived in the US, I'd print them in the US. But anyway, yeah, all that's over there.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
ANCreport.com is a wealth of knowledge too. There's
Oh yeah,
documentaries on there.
ANCreport.com is on all things, but you'd have to search for the Epstein stuff because right now it's all Yemen, Iran, Ukraine. I cover the current things, but yeah, you just go in there and use the search engine. It's not perfect, but there's a lot of stuff we've done covering Epstein, Nygaard, Miller, Mike Jeffries. Anytime there's a major pedophile ring, including the Cambridge ring that's out now, it's in the courts with the James Lee and this case, these Korean high-end brothels that were servicing both DC and MIT and Harvard. And there doesn't seem to be any interest in this case. And there's 3,000 Johns. They have 2 of the cell phones with 2,800 names, and they've only released like 30 names of those 2,800. So what's going on there. This is a protected class. And I'm telling you, yeah, you're right. Like, when you're saying, I'd have to say culture's downstream from media. So it's like, yeah, that's what all these things come downstream from culture, but culture's downstream from media. And if you can beat them in mass media, you can win. And that goes to that other quote of mine where I say you only have to hear the truth once, because they have to spend millions and millions of dollars to lie on repeat. But if you hear the truth even one time, it works because it resonates, because it makes sense. The thing, people think that's a quote from the Nazis because they're saying, well, Goebbels was saying that. Well, Goebbels was saying that about the Allies. He said if you repeat a lie long enough, everyone will believe it. Well, both sides did repeat lies over and over again and did do that. But what I'm saying is the opposite. Yeah, they do have to repeat lies in order for it to work, but we don't. And that's how, yeah, they might have billions of dollars and they have governments and they have everything, but they constantly have to keep track of all this crap. You only have to hear the truth one time. And once you find like one of my videos, you'll probably watch the rest of them because it makes sense. This is a long narrative all the way from when they murdered JFK through 9/11 on to now. It's the same cabal, it's the same clique of people. They're running the honey traps. They're running this organized criminal group. And once you know where to look, you can't unsee it. They can't get that genie back in the bottle. And that's why we get censored. That's why I've been debanked. That's why I've been kicked off everything but Twitter. And I was kicked off Twitter until 2023. I don't know how you found me, Ian, because I wasn't anywhere.
I don't remember either, man. But it was
maybe
Empire Unmasked originally is what I found.
Oh
and
yeah,
Empire
probably.
Unmasked was that first truth that I heard, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to learn more. And that just cracked.
So you saw that before War by Deception, because War by Deception was free, and that used to be on YouTube, like the watered down version of it was. But yeah,
so
that's
I
the thing.
highly recommend people go and check out Ryan's media on ANCreport.com.
I learned about the Boys Town, Nebraska from Mike Rivero.
Yeah.
I'd known about the Finders cult, and I knew about DC Madame, but all that stuff with Larry King, for me, was people like that.
Yeah.
And you got to find these like weird alternative websites that are only ones covering these things sometimes.
Yep. And so definitely, check out Ryan Dawson's website, ancreport.com. Definitely go to epsteinjustice.com and sign up to follow along there, sign up to learn from Nick and get involved with those grassroots movements. A huge thank you to ZeroHedge. ZeroHedge is the one that brought this all together and put this together and actually hosted this debate and sent out all the emails and got us in one place at one time to share all of this. So be sure to follow ZeroHedge. I'm Ian Carroll, and if you want, you can follow me at my website is cancelingiancarroll.com, or you can just follow me here on X. Doing my best to learn along with all you guys, because there's always so much to learn and know. And there's never a shortage of horrible people and horrible things in this world to expose. But fortunately, it is getting exposed. So thanks to people like Ryan and people like Nick that are doing the hard work to actually do the journalism on the ground, expose the documents, publish things, and help shed light on all this darkness. That's the kind of stuff that gives me hope, because you only need to hear the truth once. And once the truth gets on the internet, it can be shared and it can be spread. And so take this truth and spread it and share it and give it to your friends and give it to your parents and tell them to keep looking and tell them to keep sharing, because eventually the truth spreads all the way, and they can only keep the lie going for so long. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being in the show. Be sure to share it, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Now
Ryan.
is the time to take advantage of the power of gold and silver to grow your wealth, whether you're an experienced investor or new to the game. These precious metals have a long history of being a safe haven for your savings, but they also offer growth potential, making them a wise investment choice. So where does the average investor go to buy gold and silver? That's easy. JM Bullion. JM Bullion is one of the most popular and most trusted precious metals retailers in the nation. We offer a huge selection of gold, silver, platinum, and palladium products that can be delivered to your door in safe, discreet, fully insured packaging. From 1 gram of gold to an entire mint box of silver, JM Bullion offers precious metals to suit every financial goal and budget. No matter your budget, now is the time to start investing in precious metals and start protecting yourself and your savings against these volatile markets. Visit jmbullion.com today to take a look at our wide variety of precious metals, rounds, coins, and bars, and find out how you can turn your savings into gold. Now is the time to take advantage of the power of gold and silver.